So, welcome everybody to track 3 on the Giants Jukebox. This past year, that whole playlist theme that we've been going with here has been on shuffle mode, but not repeat mode. So, tonight is the final rollout of the year. We are glad that you're here. If you're viewing this live, we will be sending you sketch information at just a few days. I will get that together and have my secretary send that out over the next couple of weeks. And if you're getting this from a video after the fact that we've recorded, we're glad you're viewing the recap and sorry you can't get the state clock hours. But the goal of these sessions is to give you a bird's eye overview of an entire Giants grade level. And we're going to get into the weeds with some of the activities. You have 3 incredible hosts tonight. You've got Dr. Phil Gershmel, you've got Lindsay Benso, and Joy Kuhr. And they were the original authors of these units. And they have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this. So really looking forward to turning you over to them in just a minute. The agenda for the evening kind of looks like this. I have a very brief The Story of Third Grade Giants to go over with you, and then we get into the weeds. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about assessment and what that can look like, and then we'll move into a Q&A with the unit authors. So like I said, you are in for a treat tonight because these 3 are fantastic. So I'm looking forward to learning alongside of you. Um, if you have never seen Giants before, this should be the page that you go to. It's at misocialstudies.org. I know the people who are on the call so far have already connected here, but there is a page floating around out there where everything is brown, and while it does link to the same units, that is an old website that should be on its way out the door. So we have completely moved over to misocialstudies.org, and you can access everything there by hovering your mouse over the appropriate grade level and then choosing the units that you're looking for or the pacing view. Um, Also, I am excited to let you know that Giants is now a official MCSS product. So going forward, we will be continually hosted by the Michigan Council for the Social Studies, and I think that it's great that MCSS was able to swoop in so that we can make sure that these continue to stay updated and relevant for many years to come. This is our pacing view, and the purpose of the pacing view is to show you roughly how long each unit is expected to take. You'll see when you get into the weeds of individual units that most units have about 3 lessons, and 3 lessons in traditional terms might lead you to believe that there's only 3 days worth of instruction, but that is not the case. A good rule of thumb, and Joy and Lindsay will be able to tell you a little bit more about this as we go through, but a good rule of thumb is divide the number of lessons by the number of weeks, and that's roughly how long a lesson should entail. And some of them have some suggested timing sequences. So just be aware of that. 3 lessons doesn't mean that there's a grand total of 12 days of social studies instruction. We have a full year planned, and they'll also talk a little bit about the structure tonight of amount of time for social studies, because we know that it's not an hour in a lot of classrooms. So that's part of the reason why some of these units are stretched out as long as they are, because we recognize third grade is still elementary, and there is some flexibility that needs to be taken there. So Giants is centered around compelling questions, and I love the third grade ones. We kick off with what makes Michigan special, and that's kind of a geography unit. A lot of these blend a lot of those content standards. But I have loved this question since the open book writers first came back with it back in 2016 when we were working on the third grade book that kind of ties into this. So I've loved that question. It's a great starting point, and that is how we sort of kick things off. Then we get into some history, and we talk a little bit about how did resources and trade impact the indigenous people's way of life 500 years ago. We sort of build off of that a little bit with a follow-up unit on how should people treat their neighbors. And as the SEL consultant for Wexford Misaki ISD, there's a great overlap between social studies, compelling question, and some great entry points for some social emotional learning at the elementary level as well, because I think we have those conversations a lot, especially with the kids that we have right now. Like, how should we be treating our neighbors? So good overlap there beyond the social studies classroom, which I like. And then finally, how did people learn to make the population and economy grow in Michigan? So this covers, elementary has separate silos. We have the geography silo, the history silo, the economic silo, the civic silo. And while we do our best to blend, this is where you will start to see some of those econ and civic standards that maybe didn't quite fit into an integrated approach for some of the others. So, four incredible, compelling questions, each with their own supporting questions and lessons to go along with them. Oftentimes, you will see open book reference there. If you are lucky enough to have a print edition textbook, you're just going to look for that same chapter that sort of aligns to the topics that goes along with that book. And if you don't have a textbook, Michigan Open Book is linked and referenced in a lot of these units, and that is free online and also still being updated on a regular basis. So just keep that in mind. And I have some separate videos if you need anything on how to use Open Book in particular. So and then we get into the weeds. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and let Dr. Gershmal start. And like I said, you guys are in exceptional hands this evening. So I'll be around monitoring the chat, letting other people come in as they get here, but we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. So Phil, go ahead and share your screen and let's take off.
I'm given 10 minutes to give a quick overview of how the activities work in Unit 1 here. So with that, there are some handouts, so there's no need to take any detailed notes on this. Just relax and see what students can learn from the map activities and the readings in these different parts. He said, what makes Michigan special? As a question for Unit 1. This is just about conditions in Michigan, how it's similar to or different from other states, how it's different in different places in Michigan, and how the location of Michigan in North America influenced the resources there. That's your background information. How you start the students out, we've got a game right at the beginning. Where should we locate our village? The task for the students is very simple. They look at a presentation, they've got a map in front of them, and they try to pick which of 6 places they would like to build their village. And then the presentation gives them more information, and they might change their mind. The objective is to learn a few key facts about Michigan in a really engaging way. I'd say the objective is to say, social studies is fun, kids. Let's pay attention. And teachers can diagnose their prior knowledge and their map skill because it's deliberately set up to allow that to happen. And the teacher notes tell you a little bit more about that. And all the choices, all 6 of them, turn out to be real places. And they're going to show up later in the class as important places for one reason or another. Go from there to a completely different activity, and that's deliberate. This is a presentation that shows them how to make a thermometer graph when they're given the temperature data for 12 months of the year. Then students get data for a different place, make their own graph, and try to figure out what city their graph represents. This is what a typical student's worksheet looks like, because part of the job is for them to learn or review how to read and make a bar graph. Nice little math link here. They also get some background about temperature pattern in Michigan and in a number of other states. I use the word number of deliberately because you can choose how many or how few you want to do depending on the interest level of the students and what other objectives you want to cover. How you do this, Dave showed you, click on the Basic Giants website, find 3rd grade and hover over it, click on the unit that you want, and when you get to the unit, it'll tell you with a little bar there, little symbol, what are the topics that are within that unit. And I've got my arrow pointed at thermographs there. When I open that up, a quick look at what the website looks like. You've got a number that tells you what step you are within that lesson. A learning target is going to be given you in each one of these sections. There's a little bit of curricular advice as to how you can make it bigger or smaller. step-by-step instructions, a printable handout. The right column has got the resources that you can download, an editable presentation, a technology link. And some of the lessons also have reading links directly in that right column. We'll say some more about this later. I've only got 10 minutes. The website has pictures, data, and blank forms for making snow graphs. If you want to extend that lesson, they'll help them build a little bit more complete mental map of Michigan. And you review the math lesson. A third topic within this is to compare Michigan with another state. We use a kind of a double bubble diagram and then a whole bunch of resources, readings, graphs, maps, webcams. Students can explore the differences between Michigan and a couple selected other states. They see where Michigan is located in the U.S. and how that location helps to make it different from other places like Florida or Texas. I mentioned the word readings, and one of the ones that we use pretty much in here is to pull single pages out of a book called M is for Mitten or a book on Where is Michigan, and they gain information from these short texts. They can listen to them, they can read along, they can read independently, you can do read and shares. All depends what your literacy objectives happen to be. The objective is simply to link social studies and literacy standards where the social studies people are picking the readings, not the reading teacher, so that it fits the social studies selection that we've got. Again, a whole lot more about this a little bit later. I've got one more to look at, making a region map. They view a presentation that goes step by step as to how to make a map of the nut trees in Michigan. Now, there's a reason to pick nut trees. They happen to be really important trade goods for the indigenous people, and the nut trees were the indicators that Europeans used to choose the places that were likely to be able to grow good crops for them. So knowing where the nut trees grew in Michigan is probably a good thing to have. And it really helps if the student makes their own map. And so we give them an activity after they've seen the PowerPoint on how to make the nut tree region. They can make a map of the pine tree region. And the presentation discusses some of the possible problems the students might have with that. The objective is to learn a map language that is later going to be used to show a whole lot of topics, everything from indigenous villages to gas wells. And students are more likely to take ownership of that map if they make it themselves. And the website has the raw materials for a whole lot of those. By the way, all of these maps were copied from an online clickable map. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Which means I've done my 10-minute quick look at a range of different kinds of activities. I'm going to turn this over to Lindsay.
Phil, you did excellent on time. So Phil just shared a few of the resources that you are going to use throughout the unit. And those are really high interest resources for both you and your students to kind of drum up their excitement around social studies. So we're going to spend a few minutes to talk a little bit about the nitty gritty, how to actually teach the lesson. Next slide, please, Phil. Phil's driving the PowerPoint today. So just as Dave said, each unit is organized around a compelling question, and that's meant to be an open-ended question that your kids really have to kind of wrestle with, consider, and reconsider throughout the unit. So this is more inquiry-based learning. It's less of a textbook or sit and get where we're having kids like read and summarize and synthesize information, even though those skills do come up throughout the units. So your kids are going to be learning through inquiry and collaboration. They're going to be applying a lot of the skills that they're learning as readers, writers, mathematicians, and scientists within the Giants work. Phil showed you one example where they're using their math skills to create a bar graph. There are a lot of places throughout the units where students are required to do some writing and to defend a position with reasons and evidence. And then as we kind of look through the units, you're going to see that they are designed to be used really flexibly to fit into different constraints you might have around time, or other factors that kind of come up in your classroom. So while you will see textbook links and literature links throughout the units, this program is not meant to be a read cover to cover textbook type program. And throughout the units, we have lots of opportunities for kids to have discussions, work together, and collaborate. So it isn't like a traditional sit and get set of lessons. Next slide, Phil. Thanks. So a couple of the resources that Phil highlighted on that introductory page, there is a units at a glance sheet that really gives you kind of your whole year pacing. Each box tells you the compelling question, and then it'll list some of the activities underneath that you're going to be working on throughout that unit. Underneath the compelling questions, there are supporting questions, and those are really linked to each lesson. So each lesson is organized around those supporting questions, and then the lessons are broken down into steps. So this is a really great pacing view, so you can kind of see where you're going across a unit and then also across the whole year. This also lists some of the read alouds that you'll do throughout the units. And there are a couple in there which are in bold, and those are read alouds that you definitely want to make sure you get in. So those are books that you might want to source from your school library or a local library. And this page can be accessed in the Giants third grade folder. There's when you open up the folder, there's a list of units and then a list of resources. And this document is circled there at the bottom, so you can find it in the main folder. Next slide, please. So as I spoke about earlier, there are a lot of transferable skills in Giants. You are going to be coaching your kids around a lot of speaking and listening skills because they are going to be sharing ideas and considering ideas with partners and as a whole group. Again, you'll be working on some expository and persuasive writing. There are opportunities for them to try out both genres. And I do believe there's also a narrative writing piece in one of the units as like an extension. Then there are a lot of inferring and synthesizing activities. So the map activity that Phil was highlighting earlier is a great one for just working on some inferencing skills, especially when you're layering different map layers. When we talk more about the clickable maps, you'll kind of see more about that. So these units will really support kids with this work of making inferences from text features as well as text, and then synthesizing information across resources. Next slide, please, Phil. So this is kind of a breakdown of an actual lesson. So as I said, each lesson is organized. The compelling question anchors the unit, and then underneath that, there are supporting questions for each lesson. And those are designed to help kids gather information that will lead them to a robust answer for the compelling question. So there on the left, you'll see the steps, and that'll tell you which order the activities are being taught in. Each step of each lesson has its own learning target, and those are sometimes cumulative, so they'll build on each other across the lesson and across the unit. And then this resource was really made for teachers by teachers. So there are a lot of notes that we've included over the years to kind of give you some teacher tips, and those are always listed at the top. Sometimes there will be notes that will tell you if you're limited on time, here's how you might shorten the lesson, or here's how you might extend the lesson. And then there are also some notes in there that give you directions if you're using the digital resources. Down there at the bottom where you see kind of like the outline format, those are the steps that you will actually use to go through and teach the lesson. And for many of them, they're very scripted, so that if you are just opening this and have never taught social studies before, you've got enough material there to help you kind of get through the lesson. So that's what's in that middle column of the lesson page. And then all of your resources will be listed over on the far column, and that's typically where we'll put the links. It'll tell you like how many pages to print for each student or for each lesson, and then there will also be links to digital texts or digital resources that you might be using in the lesson. So just to recap, that middle column is really where you will find your step-by-step lesson instructions. Next slide, please.
So that puts us, I think, on Unit 2 to take a look at it. This one is mainly about the Anishinaabe. These were the indigenous people that were living in Michigan, in most parts of Michigan. But they weren't just one group, you know. Where, when, and how did they live is a little bit more complicated question, because the resources that they found in different parts of Michigan were different. And they had pretty elaborate trading networks. So we have them repeat what they learned in making a map of regions with nut trees and with pine trees and so on. They get maps of the indigenous villages, the three fires, the three subgroups of Anishinaabe people. And they've got a combination of readings, videos, clickable maps. They appreciate that the people were not all the same, and they did not always live in the areas where they were first observed in 1776. And students can make region maps from these to help them remember a little bit more clearly the different parts of the state that were occupied by the three fires. Which leads us to readings, daily life, and storytelling. And I'm going to pass this over to Joy because she's the one who's been assembling the readings for us.
Phil, can I interrupt you really quickly before Joy starts? So some feedback we got about the map activities, some teachers felt like they were repetitive because the kids are looking at the same maps multiple times over multiple units. That was intentional. So as you're working through Unit 1 into Unit 2, your expectations for the work that students will do around those maps will increase. You can also use those as an informal assessment. Especially there are some small maps that kind of print out on half pages, and those work really well for quick informal assessments to see how kids are doing with their map skills. So know that as you're working from Unit 1 into Unit 2, there will be a lot of repetition to provide reteaching if your kids need it, or to provide for some assessment or independent activities.
Okay. Thank you. And just to piggyback on that, you will see that where the region's knowledge comes into play later on when we do other activities. And if they have that confidence of knowing what regions are, then it just ties in nicely to another unit later on. And they really, really come to know what a region is. And then you can use that in other areas of social studies as well. But we really wanted to be intentional with tying in some literacy. A lot of times people say social studies is over here and then reading is over here. And we were like, we really can learn a lot through these books. So we've really searched and are always on the hunt for other books that we can add to our repertoire. But this is an example right here of life in an Anishinaabe camp. And this is not a book that you would use as a read aloud, but this is a book that's got a lot of really good resources of what it's like. It shows you what it's like in a lodge, of what they would live in the winter months, and that several families would come together. It shows you the roles of everybody who's in the camp, from kids to adults, and how they live, how they survive, what they hunt, what they eat, what resources that they use. And it's just a great way to show them this rather than just tell them. So this is one resource that we use. We're constantly looking for other resources, but we have found that this book has great pictures that really describe what life in an Anishinaabe camp would look like. Phil, if you want to go to the next slide. These are some other books that, if you look at the standards in social studies for third grade, one of the things it says is that it's truly, they need to be authentic books that represent the Anishinaabe. And that has been a challenge to find some of these. If you look in Michigan, My Open Book, there's some things we partnered with Eric Hemingway, who as an indigenous person who was able to give us some insight of where you hear about legends. And a lot of times we're used to hearing about legends from the legend of Sleeping Bear Dunes, the legend of the Sleeping Bear. There's different legends, that legend of the Petoskey Stone. Those are great as a way to talk about what legends are and to use in a resource, but those are not authentic Anishinaabe legends. And sometimes legends are told only in wintertime. Sometimes you have to be of a certain age when you hear a legend, and some legends are appropriate for third grade and some legends are not appropriate for third grade. That's something we've learned as well. So one of the ones that we kind of work with is Shingabus. We have also attached later on, you'll see that this is a read aloud that you can listen to as well. And 13 Moons on a Turtle's Back is a great story of just showing a variety of tribes and how they tell time, and it ties in traditional stories with some history of these tribes and the locations of where they live. So it's a good way to show the students. Some tribes might live in a different, in Anishinaabe, a lot of them lived in wigwams, but in this story, some of the indigenous people lived in different homes and what that was like according to where their resources were that they lived. But it is a great way to tie in, especially right now, there's the sugar maple moon, and we've been talking about that. Like, do you think that would correlate with like March? Because now is the time that we are doing the maple sugar. So this is something we're always continuing to look for, but just be aware of that. Just because it's a legend in the book doesn't mean, and it's an Anishinaabe legend, and that we want to be cautious that we are be authentic to the Anishinaabe. So that's one of the things we're always looking out for. So Phil, I'm not sure if there's another slide for this one. If I had the resource cards, I think this is going into the vocabulary for Lindsay. So I'll let you take over from here, Lindsay.
Thanks, Joy. So as Joy said, there's a lot of work in the second unit helping kids envision what life was like in Michigan many, many years ago. And you're really trying to help them get a sense of how life was different and what daily life may have been like. So we have a lot of opportunities for kids to use different vocabulary words and to also consider resources. Because for a lot of our students, they're not necessarily going to make the connection that food didn't just come from Meyer if you lived here 500 years ago. So these resource cards are one activity you can use with your students to help them consider how different places produce different resources and how those resources could be used for lots of different things. We spent some time today, we were doing one of the map activities in my class, and we talked a lot about trees because one girl was saying that, trees would be really, really important. And someone else said, well, yeah, but like trees are everywhere. And she was insistent that you had to have the right trees for the right kind of bark and the right kind of wood. And so this activity is a really great one for just generating some of those conversations. So these cards are great. You can print them in color, laminate them, and then use them throughout Unit 2 and also into Unit 3 when you start talking more about trade. Next slide, please, Phil. Oh, I was supposed to say something about the cards and the maps. So you can also layer in, when you're looking at the different maps of different regions, you can layer in those resource cards with that activity to kind of get like a double activity out of it. And there's one activity where kids will actually be kind of trading some resources and considering like what their life would be like given a certain set of resources. So it really gets kids thinking, making inferences. And again, it ties in a little bit of that speaking and listening piece. And there are some writing extensions you can do with that as well.
Yeah. So Lindsay mentioned the word trade. We've actually got several different activities that are involved with trade. And one of the ones that has turned out to be pretty popular with students is called Farmer Shrunk Stump. Now, this is one that you have to practice how to say it, first of all. The task that they have is to watch a presentation, have a map in front of them. It talks about an archaeology site in West Michigan. And what they do is find out where the individual elements that were found in that archaeology site, where they might have come from. Because there was some copper in there, and that came up from the Keweenaw Peninsula. Anyway, we could show you this PowerPoint later on if you'd like to see it. They appreciate that the indigenous people had an extraordinarily extensive trade network, that archaeology site in West Michigan had some seashells from Texas, and it had some buffalo robes and pipestone from Minnesota and flint from Ohio. And somehow that managed to all get to Western Michigan. And while they're doing this, they're reviewing, or in some cases learning, the names and locations of some of the states. It's a whole lot more interesting way to do that than to necessarily just put together a puzzle on the floor and learn states only by their shapes and not by their relationships. A supporting presentation, if you want to do a little bit more with that, involves the rivers that form the crooked borders. And this is what a typical example of student work when they're doing that. When they're learning that the river goes between two states, they're learning the locations of those states in another way, actually engaging a different brain network than the shape approach with the puzzle. All of this is reminding students that many of these rivers were really important canoe routes for hunting and trade by the indigenous people and by the fur traders who came later. So it had a lot to do with shaping where we wound up having our first settlements and the trading posts and things like that. So we got a page here about assessments at the end of Unit 2 here, Lindsay, to just talk about how we did the assessments, right?
Yep, thanks, Phil. So like I said earlier, there are several activities where kids are kind of repeating similar tasks, maybe layering in some more complex thinking. There are also more formal assessments embedded throughout the units. So you can use any of the activities that you have repeated. You can use those exit tickets. There are also some short exit tickets at the end of lessons. Some lessons have kind of performance tasks or writing tasks that go along with them. There are also some map assessments you can use to assess kids' map skills. And I know Joy has done that kind of on the heels of Unit 1 going into Unit 2, since Unit 1 focuses a lot on geography skills. There are also a lot of writing prompts embedded in the assessments across the units. And I've actually used some of those writing prompts and then paired them with the rubrics and checklists that we're using during our writing instructional block. So that's a nice way to kind of build in some integration across subjects. As you look through the assessments across the units, you'll find a lot of open-ended questions, again, mimicking those compelling questions that are meant to have multiple answers and that require justification. You'll also have some assessments that include cause and effect thinking and inferring. I've also used some social studies materials in my reading groups when we're working on those comprehension skills. So there's another crossover. And then you'll also work a lot to help your kids support their ideas and their claims with specific details. So if you think about the work that you do around reading text features, you are going to have kids support their claims with lots of different resources, including maps, including pictures, using infographics and text features from my open book, which has a lot of really cool interactive resources in it. So you'll really help kids draw in lots of different kinds of evidence to support their claims as you work through the units. Joy, do you have any other tips around assessments?
Not necessarily about assessments, but Phil, can you go back just for a minute for the maps, either for the Crooked Borders or Farmer's Trump Stump for just a second? Yeah, that's fine right there. I just wanted to say one of the things I've done when I've taught this unit, the first time that I teach about Farmer's Trump Stump, we're just focusing on what are the resources, like the copper, the digging stones, and we're trying to see what connections do they, what waterway systems do they use? And again, long before Columbus was here, or anybody else, not Columbus, but before anyone else really established these things, they had a very a great highway system, basically, with the waterways. And so they start getting to know these regions early on, and we go over them and over them and over them, because most of the time I have found that in social studies, they don't come to third grade with a lot of knowledge, and especially a lot of geographical knowledge. So to review, what's this river? The Mississippi. What connects to it? And why do we call it the mighty Mississippi? And there's some other veins that you can see. There's other maps that show the Mississippi being much thicker, and so then they see that a lot of these rivers are flowing into the Mississippi River. We talk about a lot of those things first, and then we get ready to switch over to the Crooked Borders, and they're like, hey, we just did this map. And we're like, yes, but now we're doing it from a different perspective, and we're focusing on just on these rivers and how they connect. And you continue, to just ask a lot of questions, and then they also see how rivers are also, that's one natural border, but then you also see how the mountains are part of the borders as well. So they really start learning a lot about the not technology, but they learn a lot where these places are located. They can tell you the Missouri River goes across. They start thinking it goes all the way back to where do you build your village? And one of the things that all villages built their homes on near a waterway, near some type of water source. So we'd stop and just take a minute and look at Missouri alone. And I said, probably the three largest cities in Missouri are Kansas City, Missouri, Jefferson City, Missouri, and St. Louis, Missouri. And where do they all fall? All along the Missouri River that just cuts across it. So those are just some other ways that we've just kind of connected both of those maps, and the repetition is there for a reason. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And then you could totally use this map, again, a blank map, just as an assessment tool if you wanted to, as a formal assessment, and say, okay, could you now, without following along, could you highlight some river, and what would be the importance of that river? And the impact of trade with the indigenous culture. So that's another thing how you could tie in assessments with that.
You want to say a little bit about how you have them do a notebook too?
Yes, so they're taking notes, and one of the things we talked about when we went back earlier for even B is buffalo. They found buffalo hide in Farmer's Trump Stump, and they were like, well, where would that come from? And so they said, because we said, well, in Michigan, we did have buffalo, but they had more buffalo in Nebraska and Kansas. And so then we pull up the Nebraska, because we have the Michigan flag. And what do we have on the Michigan flag? We have a moose and we have an elk. Well, on Kansas state flag, they have the buffalo. And so that's just another way to say, see, this is why this would make sense if, we don't have a buffalo on our flag because we didn't have a large number of them like Kansas did. So we're taking notes about some of these things, and they have a notebook, and sometimes we say you can have an open book notebook for that you can use some of your notes for some assessments, and then it's just a good way to record some of these things. They can decorate them in all things that have to do with Michigan. And then you tie in, like, have you been to a Michigan Whitecaps game? Have you been to any beach in Michigan, any state park? And then they bring some stickers or pictures and some of those in, and we decorate their notebooks and stuff. So that's a great takeaway when they leave. They have some of these maps inside these notebooks, and they've written notes based on books that we've read, things like that, so they can go back and tie some of those things in as they have assessments or just as a refresher of their learning.
And just to add on to what Joy's saying, there are several resources across the units that are kind of like a smaller half sheet, and those are meant to be, if you're using notebooks, they're meant to be copied and pasted into kids' notebooks just to make that a little bit easier. And then just to echo what Joy is saying, the notebooks are a great resource if you are using social studies to kind of build up to a large piece of writing. In years past, I've had kids kind of collect some thinking around one of the compelling questions in their notebooks, and then towards the end of the unit, as more of a writing assessment, I've had them write to answer the compelling question, kind of using the evidence they've collected across the unit as like their notes page, so that they've got everything they need to write that longer essay.
And also, just to add to that, I just use a normal composition notebook. And then we also have a folder because sometimes the maps might be a little bit bigger or some resources. So we put all of those things together. And another thing, just to tie in with this, you're just seeing a snippet of some of these slideshows. And so on one of the slideshows, it talks about, it talks about Lewis and Clark. And, in 1804, Thomas Jefferson has purchased, we've got the Louisiana Purchase. What does that look like? And we were like, so much of this area or part of the United States has not been explored. So who does he asks Lewis and Clark to do this. And so who do they get to interpret and help them out on a lot of these things is Sacagawea. So then it's March is Women's History Month. We were able to tie in Sacagawea with this and see that Sacagawea is on a coin. And it was just a great way to tie in because a lot of the third graders did not know who Sacagawea was. So it just kind of ties that in, even with this maps, even that much more, and just cements that knowledge. So they really had a better understanding of who she was. And they've seen that coin, but now it makes it more impressionable to them. So just another way to tie that in.
Well, that should bring us to Unit 3, which starts to look at the cultural contact between Europeans coming into Michigan and the indigenous peoples that are there. One of the lessons that starts out with that emphasizes reading a little bit because it basically is a collection of quotations from early explorers' journals, 6 of them. And the quotations are very carefully selected so that they have all kinds of information about a place, about the environment of that place and the people that are living there. The task, however, for the students is to read the quotation and try to figure out which of the 6 places on the map that quotation might have come from. A lot of these lessons, the middle column will give you an idea of how you make it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. The way to make this one a little bit shorter is just to give them the answers for 3 of the quotations or whatever and have them do the other 3. The way to make it a little bit longer is to have different groups work with the different packages of different quotations and then try to do the matching. So they practice critical reading, and they are reviewing some basic facts about Michigan geography as those facts were viewed by some of the early Europeans that were traveling through this area and taking notes about what they saw. Like I say, the teacher notes has all kinds of suggestions about how to make these activities shorter, longer, harder, easier. You could run this as a whole class discussion, or you could allow students to use the online clickable map or their notebook to gather information about background of what's going on in these different places and to try to match them up with the quotations. Several screenshots from that clickable map have been assembled and put together into a really pretty durable, markable, and very cost-effective map. And we make it available in a number of different sizes, from 18 by 18 inch desk maps to the 3 foot by 3 foot one that's hanging on the wall behind me. And if you've got $200, you can get a 9 by 9 foot floor map, which it really does attract attention from people when they see that sitting on the floor when they're walking into the room. And all the little inset maps were made from the clickable map. So this connects directly to their notebooks. And when we talk about clickable maps later, you can print maps from that the students can put into their notebooks. That brings us to a resource called Alexander Henry. Basically, it's just a collection of readings taken out of the diary of a guy who was captured at Fort Michilimackinac and spent a year living with the Ojibwe people. This is a really useful primary document. In fact, this whole section, Unit 3, is about primary documents. Teachers in other states would just love to have one that fits so well with their state history. Do either of you have anything you want to say about Alex?
Yeah, I want to say something about this. This is such a phenomenal resource. We are so fortunate to have this because it takes you, as he was captured, he ended up becoming friends with Wawatam, his Ojibwe friend, and so he goes the a whole year, and he goes in different places in the summer. He goes through the different seasons, and it really is fascinating to have this as a primary resource. It's a great way to teach what's the difference between primary resource and a secondary resource, and why we're so fortunate that he documented 1 year, and it was 1763. And even the way that they dressed, what resources did they use? Why did they have to build a scaffold to put the meat up on? What was the purpose of that? Why did they move during the seasons? So many ways to help students with critical thinking skills. And what I have done is I have printed out a booklet for each of the students that I have, and we go through it page by page, and we do activities in there. And it just helps to deepen their understanding of what life was like during that time period in the role of Indigenous people, and that they did have to come back to a fort, and they traded with people there. What would they bring back to the table? How could they, that they used credit even then, what that was like. You can tie that in a little bit with economics, and it does tie in later on when you do a whole activity with a trading post. So we are really fortunate that we have this, and it just teaches just what a life would be like. And it ties back in again with, oh, it's maple sugaring season. What are they going to do with that? And that was something they could use to trade. That was another thing they could use as to benefit them and use as a trading resource. So we're really fortunate for this. And I just taught this not too long ago, and all my students could tell you who Alexander Henry was, and just some things. It helps you to step back in time to see what life was like a little bit better.
Just to add on to what Joy was saying, as you're kind of looking through those primary sources in this unit, you are really helping your kids build a lot of background knowledge around the conditions in Michigan hundreds of years ago. And we know as readers, when our kids step into the work of historical fiction, they often struggle to understand what's happening in the story because they don't have context for some of the things. So it's really nice to read Alexander Henry with kids because it's such a small chunk of text that you can pair with many of the other resources you've examined across both units so that kids have a really rich understanding of what the time period is like, which really supports their comprehension as readers and as they're looking through a social studies lens.
Yeah. And Alexander Henry was kind of in the middle of what was going on between French, British, and indigenous people. And a lot of that is found a thing called the fur trade. This is two primary documents that we use here. One of them is an old map that they look at and they find out, what was the French word for lake and where did the Ottawa people originally live and a bunch of other questions like that. And a photo of a reconstructed trading post. So they have a lot of fun learning why, where, and how Europeans built these fur trading posts. And they can speculate about the names and uses of things shown in the photo. And I've got a hot link to this one if we want to just take a quick look at this PowerPoint later on after the Q&A period. Another one is not exactly a primary document, but it's a review of the region map idea, looking at where the British, French, and Spanish built whatever they built in North America. And they built a wide range of things, from military forts to religious missions. It's an optional activity because it actually comes back again in Giants 5th grade when they're talking about early U.S. history and the roots of the 7 Years' War. Each of 3 groups gets a map that shows the locations of the missions or trading posts or forts of one country. They've got to try to figure out what country that is. And they get some readings about different kinds of European arrivals from Spanish clerics coming over here, missionaries. What they do first is to color their region and then try to figure out which country's colonies their map shows. When they put all these maps together, they can start to predict where conflicts might occur between British and Spanish, between French and Spanish, and so on. There is an online interactive clickable map that lets you review this work, or you could even do it as a whole class discussion. You can turn on and off different numbers of trading posts or where the explorers came into the area. Like I say, you can explore that map. Britain versus France and Pontiac is a place where we turn them over to My Open Book specifically and say, let's take a look at the different viewpoints. So, Joy, you probably know more about this one than anybody else, so I'm going to talk about it.
Well, yes, I helped write this one, this page in particular. Shout out to Andrea because Andrea helped too. But this was really good because, and this was really, I appreciated this so much because Eric was right here with us and really helped us really decide, even with this picture of Chief Pontiac here. He said, this is what the indigenous people visualized Chief Pontiac looking like. And so we just appreciated that perspective as well. He was right along with us when we were doing this point of view because he was very clear that the French and indigenous people got along better, but it wasn't like they were pals, they were friends. They more or less tolerated one another. And with the English, they were bad. They were just mean and not, and they just were in it for themselves. And so it was just, it's interesting just to see the different points of view and what they used each other for. What were they trying to get from it with the resources that they had? So it's also, this is point of view is one of the hardest literary concepts for students to get. And so if they can see this from a different point of view and just ties in with those literature standards, that helps to cement these ideas as well. And they also, this is a good time to also think about Pontiac. What is his legacy? Look at all, we sometimes we stop and brainstorm all the places that are named Pontiac. There was the Pontiac car, there's the Pontiac, the Dome, there's Pontiac Park, things like that, and all because of his influence. And to tie in with what you said earlier with the maps of the French and the Spanish and the British, I've already started planting seeds like, okay, there was Sault Ste. Marie. Why is this a French name? That's a French town. Why would it be named a French town? You know, Michigan is an indigenous name. And then there's Michilimackinac, another French name. And so where is it's just a build up to the French are coming and where their influence lies as well with cities like St. Joseph and other places. Even Detroit alone is a French name, Detroit, where the three rivers forge together. So that's just another way to tie in some of these things as well, just tying back to what Phil had said earlier. But this is Michigan Open Book is a great resource that you can go back and use that has these connections. And because people like Eric was part of this, then I feel like these are truly been vetted. And so they're really good resources to use.
And that brings us to Unit 4. What pulled different groups of people to move into Michigan? How did Michigan grow to become a state? And then one of the weirdest glicks, they talk a little bit about how did people in Michigan make a living today? And why that's weird is that fourth grade basically is supposed to talk about Michigan history from statehood on, and third grade was to be up to statehood. And yet that glick is sitting there, and so we should address it a little bit. This involves a lot of readings and fewer activities because they are beginning to have a collection of maps and graphs and thermometer graphs, things like that, that they can apply to the readings that they're seeing here. So there have been suggestions all along, but the fourth unit has a little bit more focus on readings, and then with reading guides in the middle. And again, Joy, you want to talk a little bit about some of these?
Yes. And just to also tie in with what you just mentioned, another conflict that the students really enjoy is the Toledo conflict or the Toledo War, that no shot was ever fired. But that's interesting for them to see how we got the western portion of the Upper Peninsula and what a benefit it was to us, because they didn't know that we had iron ore and copper up there. So we got the benefit of that. They can have Ohio can have Toledo. But another thing was the migration, was the role of the Erie Canal. And then there's a fun song that you may have well heard that we sing together, and they love that. But that's a good way for them to learn about what was the importance and the impact of the Erie Canal that leads us to statehood. Because if it weren't for the Erie Canal, it was going to be taking much longer for us to become a state. So a couple of these books that we have here are a wide range of different books. The Log Cabin Quilt, I feel like you have to read that book with a Southern accent. It's definitely tricky, but this is a family that's coming from North Carolina. Mom has just died, and they're coming to a fresh start, and they're coming to Michigan. And it's not an easy road for them. There's no roads, what it's like, They built a log cabin, but it is quite frigid in Michigan. They they're dealing with death, and the loss of their mom, and that's all part of what pioneer living was like. And so it kind of gives more of an authentic feel of what it was like, and what they had to do to survive to make it. But those were the early pioneers of Michigan. Next Spring and Oriole is a chapter book, and kids can read this on their own, or you can read this out loud. But it's a great third grade level book. But it talks about a family that is again hopping in the covered wagon. They're also pioneers, but they also come across a member of the Potawatomi tribe, and what that entails, and how they both learn about the life of each other. When I Was 8 and I Am Not a Number are both interesting stories about residential Indian schools. And I think that that's just those are social issue books that I think are great to just show the students and teach them about this, because even for me, this is not something that I grew up learning a lot about. I've learned more since I've been here, but just the impact of that. And so I Am Not a Number is a dual language book. It is both in English and Ojibwe, and it's just When I Was 8 takes place more in the Inuit, but you can see how they both connect with each other. They were both 8 years old, which is the age of an incoming third grader, and how they come to a residential school, and how they try to strip away their culture and their heritage. And third graders, you want to tap into the empathy, and you want to build that empathy and evoke those strong emotions to help them realize how wrong that was and to learn from that. And that's and they're at a great age to be able to do that. Bow Wow Powwow is a really fun story that takes place. It is also bilingual with dual language, English and Ojibwe. And this story takes place, I think so many times we focus on the early history of Indigenous people, but Indigenous people are here now. They're in our county, they're in our states, they're in our schools. And what does a modern Indigenous person look like, and what do they do? And this leads up, there's stories from the past that are intertwined with modern day Indigenous cultural events, and they are going to end up taking you to a powwow, and what that's like ties in with other books like Fry Bread, and foods that you might have at a powwow, the jingle dresses, what they might wear, the role of that, the role of kids versus parents and adults. And that's just another good resource to use as more of an updated book. I
want to jump in really quick, Joy, if that's okay. So Joy's reviewing a lot of books, and just know that the books that are kind of like essential for the lesson are listed on that third grade units at a glance sheet, and they're in bold. There's also a resource in that third grade folder we showed you that has a list of all the books that Joy is recommending. And that list has been updated many times as Joy discovers more books to add to it. But there is a list of texts that go along with each unit right in that folder, as well as a book talk slideshow that Joy created that gives you kind of a really quick elevator pitch for each book and tells you how you might use it. Know that the literature resources that are throughout the units are meant to extend or supplement your lessons. So if you are having a hard time getting your hands on some of these texts, it won't make or break the learning. These are just additional books that you can pull in to add extra opportunities for your kids to learn about your compelling and supporting questions. There was one other thing I was going to say. Oh yeah, so just remember that that list is in that unit folder, and I know like I've given that list to our district librarian, and they've been able to find some of those throughout the school district libraries, because some of the books are a little bit older. So you can utilize that list as you're kind of planning ahead for what literacy connections you want to pull in.
And I found that some of the books are read aloud videos as well. So if that helps to supplement or to do those, to use that as well, that would be great. I just feel like because some of them are older, we wanted to update some that made it where students would be able to resonate with some. And there's one more that was a really good, it was a Caldecott award-winning book. It's called We Are Water Protectors, and it's just kind of a rally cry to help all the students and all of us to recognize that it's our job to help protect the waters and not pollute, and to take care of what we've been given. So that's just another plug for that book as well. I could go on and on about books that I would recommend and love, and I try to utilize those as much as I can in my own day-to-day teaching, and just to have a love of Michigan, to instill that love of Michigan and the great, what is so special about Michigan. There's so many things. And so these are just great to tie these in. And I tied in some of these in with November is Indigenous month, and that's a great way for us to highlight some of these during that time periods as well. So hopefully that makes sense and helps out.
Well,
Ladies,
would
I don't
also-
mean to interrupt, but I have a question. When you add the books to that list, like, are you adding them in any type of order? Like, which one you think would get us the most bang for our buck if we could get it into and supplement with? Or are they just in a random order?
Well, I would say that the middle column of the notes often it tells you not just what book would be worth reading, but they tell you the exact pages in that book that you might want to have them read. So the teacher notes that are in the Giants website are kind of a guide to where do you look in that book. And they do mention which books are the more important. So
Kim, I also dropped in the chat the link to the book list that I was referring to, and it does say on there, kind of like by unit, which books you might use, and there's also like a little note that there's some books that aren't necessarily attached to a certain lesson. So just to kind of echo what Phil said, I would start with the books that are mentioned explicitly in a lesson, and those are also highlighted on that unit at a glance sheet. And then if you're looking for additional, I would think about how much time you have. I know like I've had a hard time getting chapter books in the past just because they take a lot longer to read through as a class. So you might think about your time constraints, or you might think about what resources, what books you have available in your school library, and that might help you make some of those decisions about which books to include.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know that there's some that we try to say these are the specific pages. Even with M is for mitten and S is for sunshine, we're not reading the entire books. We're pulling out certain pieces for them, mostly the geographical pieces, because we're trying to compare. We've got two states that have two peninsulas, but two totally different landscapes and environments. And so we try to compare some of those. But Birch Bark House, we say these are the certain pages that we would recommend reading so they can see just a little tidbit of what life is like in Ojibwe, because that book covers over 100 years. So we do try to hone in on those things as well. But yeah, what the ones that are really listed and in the bold there, those are the main ones that are going to be able to help you, but the other ones are supplemental if you have them. And I would imagine that you would have several in your library that if they're Caldecott award-winning books or things like that, then they might possibly have those. So hopefully you can get those to use as supplementary, but that's a good question.
Now, with all this discussion about books, Unit 4 does still have some student activities and forums and other resources like that. For one of them, for example, they view a presentation or they read a worksheet, and then they follow written and oral instructions where their job is to try to plan the route of the Erie Canal and to see how well they do in making that plan. What they get out of this is to see how the basic geography of mountains, rivers, and lakes influence the location of the canal, and as a result, it aimed the flow of migrants toward Toledo and Detroit. And that helped explain why Michigan was, the first state of the Northwest Territories and so on to grow fast enough to become a state. Then there's an activity called the History Events Timeline. This is a set of 12 cards that have a date on one side and a short write-up of what's going on the other side. Because now we're at the stage where we're reviewing what happened all through this course. So their task is to read the text on one side of the cards and to try to arrange them in order, and then flip them over to see if they got it right. Maybe you don't want to use them that way. The cards are actually raw materials, and we were brainstorming with a group of teachers one time, tried to say, and they came up with 9 different ways that you could use cards like this, and advice for how do you adapt these for different purposes and to fit the available time. But it is a way to kind of summarize the early history of Michigan at the end of the class and then review what's going on. It's a form of a kind of whole class assessment. And then we end up with Michigan and other states revisited, and they review the earlier reading, but now they've got 2 of them. M is for mitten and S is for sunshine, and we're looking all the way back to when they did their thermographics in Unit 1. Sections from these books and from my open book can provide a framework for general review of the course content. That brings us to a summary and then a page where we can choose, where do we go from here? All of these student activities were designed to meet Michigan standards for 3rd grade Michigan studies in a way that also can support inquiries in world and U.S. history or current events in grades 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. In other words, we're helping to build a foundation. Giants is a full K-8 package. The activities are designed to reinforce and build on each other. Lindsay mentioned that earlier, that the repetition is deliberate in a number of these cases because an activity in, say, in part 3, lesson 3, might use a map that they had done in lesson 1. And it builds on activities that were done in earlier grades. We try to provide explicit connections with other content areas, math, reading, history, social studies, so on. And we deliberately tried to make activities that have different, what we call engines, the things that students actually do. The goal is to fit each topic with an approach that is proved to be effective for that topic. But there is a secondary goal, and that is to enhance interest by adding a lot of day-to-day variety. As Lindsay said earlier, it's not just, sit and get. They do different things on different days, and that helps different students might prefer particular approaches and do better on those days. So you don't have to use them all. You can start slowly. You can try just a few, add them as you see fit. But remember, they are designed to support each other as part of a structured curriculum. So with that, we are at the question and answer period. If you've got any questions that you want to park into the chat, or we could do hot links to 5 PowerPoints or shut PowerPoints off and take a look at clickable maps. So,
would you guys be willing to talk quickly about assessing 3rd grade, like your recommendations, what that looks like? Yeah, would you guys be willing to talk just a little bit about that as a opening question?
Sure. I was waiting to see if Joy was going to jump on there. So, like I said earlier, there are assessments embedded throughout the units. I have found that it helps to kind of pair like a social studies specific assessment, like an exit ticket with a map, or a really like content specific exit ticket with something that we're continuing to work on across our day, like a writing skill or a reading skill. So a lot of the assessments will have kind of open-ended questions in them, and I believe there are two where students are asked to write a longer essay or a longer response, and so those are embedded in the units. And then to kind of give them more legs, so you're giving kids more opportunities to practice, you can pair those with tools that you're using to assess their reading and their writing skills. So each unit will have an end of unit assessment, and each lesson will have an end of lesson assessment, which you might consider an exit ticket. And then there are some activities that are labeled as optional, which you can use as an activity or an assessment. So those are kind of three places where you might find assessment materials. And I don't know, Joy, if you want to jump on if there was anything that I missed.
So earlier in Unit 1, I'll just give an example for this. You saw all the regions. And so here they've done regions of pine trees. They've done regions of corn. They've done regions of even the subgroups of where they might be located. So then you feel like they really should have a good understanding of regions at that point in time. So now here's a new regional map that you're going to pull up, and it is about the minerals that are in Michigan. So they have to learn how to read this map, and then they have to be able to show you the regions of where's gold found in Michigan, where is iron ore found in Michigan, where's copper found in Michigan. So that is one of the assessments, that same map that they've seen all along, but now it's got a different resource that they have to map out. So, and then they can do a little writing piece about that as well, and tell where they're located. And then they're using their are they going to use their compass rose? Are they using their directional language? So that's another tool that we have embedded in there as well. That was a simple one. Again, we've also tried to tie some things in with the M-STEP, because we know the M-STEP is something that they're going to be taking for the first time. And so there are some, as you get further along, some essay prompts that you can use that I feel like are beneficial and tie in the knowledge that they use, not only in ELA, but also with social studies as well. And you can use those as formative assessments or summative assessments.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, go for it, Lindsay.
I dropped a link to one of the assessment documents in the chat if anyone wants to just take a quick peek at it. They're written as like one continuous document, but they're labeled lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. So you have the option of giving one after a lesson, which, a lesson takes multiple days. So you could give the lesson 1 assessment after a series of activities, or you could keep them all together and give it as kind of like a end of unit longer summative assessment. Phil, I think it would be worth showing the clickable maps, and then maybe we could talk through a little bit how those can support some of the work you're doing in class.
Yeah, I think we should show the clickable maps, but to do that, I've got to shut the PowerPoints off. Do we want to show a sample PowerPoint just to show what they look like? And if so, which one do you want?
Well, I would say this: if you are just getting started with Giants and you feel this is overwhelming, if you do nothing else but the slideshows alone, you are in good shape. They really walk you through things. It kind of there's not a lot of prep as far as it's created for you. You might just need to get a map that the kids can go along with you, or you can print out the diary too, but they're already made. So if you do nothing else but just those slideshows alone, I think there's this great benefit to those. So I feel like it'd be very valuable to walk through a slideshow.
So which one do you want? Farmer's Rome, making a region map?
Let's do making a region map, because that one will come up early
Yeah.
and connects with a lot of
Yeah,
other
guys, let us say one.
Actually, is there a way we could do one that's in the third or fourth? Because we're already through. Cassie and I are the only other two people in this chat. Cassie and I have already done the region map. We've done the whole Alexander Henry. One that's later in one of the units would be more beneficial for Cassie and I.
I forgot to mention both Pam and Cassie are coming from Jefferson schools, and they have adapted it pretty much K through 8. So yes, would that be like reading historic map, Phil, or like you guys know these units better than I do?
We've done the Alexander. I'm sorry. We've done the Alexander Henry. We've done the making a region map. We have not done that Farmer Shrump stump. I don't know if
Let's do him. It really didn't matter, because I only want to say one thing about the PowerPoints. They're all too long.
Yes,
and the reason
definitely.
And the reason that they're too long is very simple. We've tested these PowerPoints with a lot of teachers, and we've asked them for suggestions. And a lot of teachers would say, maybe you should put in a definition card on one of those frames to just define one of the words. Or you should add a map, or you should add an example. And if a teacher suggested an addition like that, we put it in, because we've noticed something about computer keyboards. They all have a delete key, but they don't have a create key. And because they've got a delete key, you can go through the PowerPoint the night before and just delete out the frames you don't want to use. Because different teachers want to use different ones out of here. So a lot of teachers would just delete this first one here, but we had a teacher that said, I like to use puzzles at the beginning. And so we put up the saying that shape matching could actually be the least effective brain network for spatial learning. And there's a good reason for that, but that reason is buried in a bunch of research studies that have been done by psychologists. So we looked for a better way to just teach the basic geography of where are the states and how are they connected to each other. And yeah, Schrumpf is in fact a real name. There are people up there that have that name. Farmer Schrumpf's tree stump, and a lot of people would just want to start with this frame. A guy named Carl Schrumpf was trying to get rid of a tree stump that was in an awkward place in his cornfield. And when he dug that tree stump out, he found a bunch of arrowheads and other artifacts. He thought they must be really old, because they must have been there before the tree started growing, and it was a big old tree. So he went and talked to some people at the university, and found out that this was probably a burial site. So they brought in a group of people from the local indigenous tribe and put together a task force to work through what was buried along with the people in this area, because they found some thin tubes that were made out of copper. And a lot of the PowerPoints will have stop frames like this, where it asks a question and you might want to have the students speculate a little bit. Or if you happen to be at the end of your class period, you could have them write what they think they might be able to, there's lots of ways you can use these stop frames if you want to, or just delete them and go on with the story. Because people used to wear these copper tubes in their hair. So they figured this must be a burying place. The activity here involves using a map to record information. And you can have that be a single map, just on a wall, or you can have individual maps in front of each one of the students. So we'll start by writing an S on the west edge of the Lower Peninsula. Now, what do you think S means? From stump. Try to say that about 5 times. The copper, though, nowhere near where that stump was, is there any copper deposits. Copper comes from a completely different place in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's a little finger of land. And so you ask the students, try to find a finger of land sticking up out of the Upper Peninsula, and put a K on that. Now, what do you remember from back when we were doing the reading about the Anishinaabe camp? How would you get from the Keweenaw Peninsula down to Western Michigan? Most of the time, these people would travel in canoes because a canoe could carry about 10 times as much as a person walking. And that makes it just a whole lot easier to carry whatever you might have been successful hunting or fishing or whatever. So draw a line to show how a canoe might go from, and you can see it just goes on and on, step by step. One teacher said, I want them to take a look at the scale of miles. So why don't you add a frame in here about how far is this canoe trip from the Keweenaw Peninsula to Farmer Strump's farm? And have them use the scale of miles. This is another frame that you might want to use or you might not want to use. Feel free to delete it. The people who were looking found more than 1,000 arrowheads and knives that were made out of flint, which is a hard rock with very sharp edges, and no flint is found in Western Michigan. So where did they get the flint? Well, the best place for the flint would be in Southern Illinois. And you have them put, an F for flint down in Southern Illinois. And then we go on step by step. Try to draw the Mississippi River from Louisiana, which is shaped like a boot, and the Illinois River. And you can see how you could take a canoe and go down from Southern Illinois. One teacher said, maybe because they had some relatives in Chicago, that we should mention that Chicago is where you would take your canoe and maybe find a bigger boat to get on Lake Michigan. They found a bunch of seashells from down here, have the students mark a little bit of seashells along the Texas and Louisiana coast, and then ask the question of how do you get a canoe full of seashells up to Farmer Strump's stone? And Pipestone comes from southern Minnesota. You could go on the Minnesota River, or you could go on the Big Sioux River to the Missouri. Joy talked briefly about where do we get buffalo? Somewhere out in Kansas and Nebraska. And so on. And I'm kind of racing through this here, digging stones from southern Ohio. If you put all of this together, where would be a good place to put the master trading post, like the Amazon the warehouse for all of these trades? Where do you build it in Minnesota or Iowa or Illinois and so on? Nearly 1,000 years ago, people did build Trading City, almost 70,000 people living there in a place called Cahokia, which happens to be located just about in the middle of that network of canoe routes. And to mark the spot, they built a mound. Now, this is an amazing piece of work. If you stop and think about it, it's almost as big as the pyramids in Egypt. It's not as steep because it's made out of dirt instead of out of rock. But this is a person standing down here. And they built this in order to mark the location of this big master trading post. So it was one of the most important trading centers in all of North America. And you could use the scale of mile to figure out who had to travel farther in order to get to that trading post. So what did we learn from this? The big point is indigenous people had to travel pretty long distances and traded a lot of things with each other. And that trading network is in place long before any explorers or fur traders came from Europe. Incidentally, they also learned the names and locations of some states and some rivers as part of the narrative here. Now, that's sort of the end of that, but if you wanted to spend more time with that, there is a supporting PowerPoint about finding rivers on maps that don't show them. They say this is the Menominee River. It's part of the border between Wisconsin and the UP. And again, we've just got a blank map, people drawing the borders in different ways. Some of them are straight lines and some of them are crooked. You've got a map with the names of the states here. There's only one place where 4 states meet. It's called Four Corners. A river could be used to mark the border, but rivers rarely go straight. So the border is going to be crooked if it follows a river. And it marks the border between Ohio and so on. So I'd say that's a look at what the PowerPoint looks like and what you can do with it. Lindsay or Joy, you got any comments?
It just helps them to be more aware of natural borders, and now they see that even some states have that man-made border. You see a straight line with some, but then you also have the crooked borders. And so they're much more aware of that now and just have a deeper knowledge of the states. And it also just enhances their critical thinking skills, which is so much of what Giants is all about. They love this. They think this is so great. And so how many of those rivers that we talked about also shared the name of a state? So another way just to remember some of those things. And they really have a curiosity about more of these states. And I would share fun facts with this as well. When we talked about the Potomac River, which is the border between Virginia and Maryland, I told them about John Quincy Adams. No, I didn't say he skinny dipped, but I did say he would like to go down there to take a bath. I said maybe they didn't have modern plumbing in the White House at that time, but that was just another tie-in with just another historical piece of that. And so I think that this is the Lewis and Clark image right here, and we talked about that with Sacagawea. Another way just to tie in. I use every opportunity to tie in some of these places, and they just appreciate it. And I said, we got to Montana through the Missouri River, but Thomas Jefferson wanted us to try to get to the Pacific Ocean. So how did we do that? You know what I mean? So we had to look at some other ways that we could get there, and just to spur that critical thinking with them. And because I'm from South Carolina, I definitely had to talk about Savannah a little bit and about this port, and share a little bit about that. So
just to add in a little teacher tip. So something that I like about Phil's PowerPoints is that they're often really easy to section out. So there will be kind of a few frames with information, and then there will be a picture, and then it goes kind of to a next section. And so what I've done in the past with Farmer Schrumpf and some of the other PowerPoints is I've made my own copy of the slideshow, and then I have selected just one section of the slides and assigned those on Google Classroom. And then I've had kids do part of the activity independently or with a partner. So we'll start the activity together, whole group, and then they'll finish a section of the slides in a small group or by themselves. And that way it kind of breaks it up a little bit. If you have a class like mine that doesn't like to sit for a very long time, that kind of breaks things up into manageable chunks. And it also makes it really easy. If you've got only 20 minutes for social studies one day, it makes it easier to kind of get a meaningful amount in, and still kind of like be building towards the greater unit understanding.
So let's close out of that. Any other thoughts about PowerPoints? And then, or else I'll shut this down and take a look at a clickable map. I'm assuming that it's visible in the middle of the screen now.
Yes.
Clickable map means just exactly what it says. You click on a button and you see something. If you want to find out where the rivers are, click on the button that says rivers. If you don't want to see them, click it again and it will disappear back off. If you want to find out where the hilly areas are, turn them on. Some of the clicks will replace the map with another one. This happens to be a University of Michigan shaded relief map where you can see, where the high areas are in northern Michigan and especially up in the UP. The individual frames that were here, we started out with about 20 layers, tried it out with some teachers. Teachers suggested some additional ones that we could add to it, and we added those. The last one to get added were mastodon fossils. Somebody thought that might be interesting because they were doing a little reading about mastodons, these elephant-like animals that used to live in Michigan. And it's interesting that the mastodons basically lived only in southern Michigan. You can use a lot of these layers like this to just ask a puzzle question. Why would the mastodons only live in southern Michigan? Why didn't they go up into northern Michigan, and ask questions like that? So having said that, Joy or Lindsay, do you got any buttons you want me to turn on? And how you would use that in a class?
Well, I think when you use the village keys and the Odawa and the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi, and then you talk about what their roles were, which tribe was more fishing, which tribe was more focused on trading, and which one was more focused on farming. When you tie that in and then you overlap it with where's corn, some of those things, it just kind of ties in with some of those.
Phil, I think I shared this with the Jefferson teachers when I met with them earlier in the year, but did you want to go a little rogue and show quickly the Michigan crops clickable that we did last summer? Because that seems related to this one. If you want, I can share my screen real quick. And if you want to pass it by, that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, let me just underscore what she said, that if you've got the Potawatomi on, they were the ones that occupied some of the corn lands in southern Michigan. That became their trade good. But if they wanted to build a canoe, and you look here where birch maple trees are, they don't have any birch trees in their area. And so they're busy trading with the people that are up there. And then you could ask, okay, which of the other two members of the three tribes, the three fires, which of them lived in the area where birch and maple trees were? And so you just keep asking a series of questions like this, and then eventually you get to, the treaty lines and who lost their land first, who were pushed out. And the Potawatomi wound up all the way in Oklahoma and Iowa. The treaty numbers are keyed to a separate list. in the Giants website of what the treaties were in order. And at some point, the map starts to get just way too messy, which is why there's a great big clear map button over here where you can get rid of everything and start over and take a look at, who lived in the area where the fishing was exceptionally good. And by the way, why would the fishing be so much better up here than in the southern parts of the lakes? And ask questions like that. The particular questions that you're going to ask kind of depend on what you're reading at the time. Because this is not a resource that you use, 1 week out of the year. This is a resource that you have available 52 weeks, 30 weeks out of the year. And can deploy when you need it. And like I said, you can print up any one of these maps and have students put it into their notebook, and then whatever writing activity you want, or an inference activity of some kind, or connected to history, there's just lots of ways to use these maps. So, any other thoughts from you two, or should we let Dave share his?
Take it away, Dave.
Well, I just dropped a link to where this is in the chat as well, because we are still we haven't placed this directly in Giants yet, but there are several places where it might end up. And this is one of, so I've been helping Phil resurrect some of his older activities from long ago that are very relevant still to this day. So I'm already making plans this summer to pitch him, several more that might be beneficial for different grade levels. But with this one, this is one of the first ones that we figured out last summer. And on this one, so it's kind of an extension of the clickable map from the standpoint of you have the ability now to, okay, well, do I remember roughly where the corn grew? And, in this particular case, the idea is how much profit can I make by growing crops? And certain crops grow, as we've noted from the clickable maps already. Certain crops grow better in certain areas. I'm in northern Michigan, so if we drop some cherries up here, oh, take a look at that. Like, hey, I can make a lot of money growing cherries up in northern Michigan. Wonder, can I make up a lot of money down here? Nope. Looks like I won't make anything. Like, cherries won't actually grow. So you have all of these there's a larger little simulation that you can walk students through that kind of tackles some of the background info here. But then they have the opportunity to play and just grab, like, hey, can I grow grapes over here? Nope, doesn't look like I can grow grapes. Where can I grow grapes? And drop it on different parts of the map. Everything is designed to sort of give students a little feedback in terms of like, yep, I can drop it here. Nope, I can't drop it there. If I do that, you see that little red box, it'll automatically move the thing over here. We also, another thing that Phil made me figure out how to program was, okay, well, I'm growing cherries there. I don't want to grow cherries anymore. What happens if I drop blueberries? So the tokens will kind of push each other off the board if you try to drop more than one on each. But again, after you've done some work with the Giants units in terms of the geography of Michigan and maybe played with that Michigan clickable map, this becomes a nice, really cool extension for it to sort of practice and remember some of the things that you have learned throughout the course of the unit. So that's my brief. Oh, and you can also, if kids really need a little extra help, you can show and hide the growing seasons. So up here, you can see, oh, I've got a longer growing season. Oh, I've got a shorter growing season. Or you can replace that with soil quality as well. So certain things grow depending on how good the soil quality is, and others not so much. So just kind of a nice value add. And I'm going to help Phil resurrect some more of these for different grade levels over the summer. But it's really a really cool extension to some of the stuff that you've already seen and learned about tonight. So Phil, that was my 2.5-minute elevator speech for it. What did I miss?
Well, I'm going to add a 15-second note at the end of it. He used an AI to help him do the programming. And then we asked the AI to try to get the best solution to it. And it hallucinated like mad. The maximum you can get is 160 points, and it came up with 211.
And to be fair, I did learn a lot of the programming. There were a couple of instances when Phil wanted the extra fun, like a token should replace each other. I had no clue what to do. So I worked a little bit with AI for that, but it was not outsourced. This wasn't vibe coding. It wasn't outsourced completely, just for some of those extra bells and whistles. But yes, the hallucination was hilarious because I wrote back to Phil and I said, it says 276. And he's like, most I've ever been able to come up with is like 182. And I created
so
this.
his job is safe from AI, and the students are safe from it.
Well, Kim and Cassie, do you guys have any? I think it's a good time to move over to Q&A for the authors. So you have 3 authors, no waiting. Do you have any questions or things you want to dig a little bit deeper into while you have them on the line? All right. Well, we have 3 minutes left. If there are any questions left, we can try to answer them, or I can gift you 3 minutes of your evening back.
I'm good. How about you, Cass?
I'm feeling very good. Thank you very much. So this has definitely been informative and just kind of a breath of fresh air for something that we need right now, especially in March. A type of training that we can really have as something that's useful.
As always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question specifically for Joy or Lindsay. I know how to reach them. But thank you for everything you guys do. And I hope you have, this is the best wish I can give all of my educator and administrator friends. I hope you have a really boring rest of your school year.
Amen to that.
Well,
All right, well, have a good one.
thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.